Hey, what's good people, welcome back to our channel. Today I'm doing another deck profile and this time of one of my favorites of all time, Lianorn. Specifically, Lianorn Masques. Because the normal right line of Lianorn is a bit weird, I decided to start playtesting with the Roroa right line with the grade 2 from Lianorn. And I've noticed that this is the preferred way for me to play the deck, but there's definitely other ways to go with this. But I'll explain why I do it like this. So before I go into the deck, I'll go over this little combo. So generally, if you write into the grade 1, you get a token. And then when you write into the grade 2, you get nothing. So if you ran the grade 2 from Rora, you would have gotten a second token, which doesn't really do anything for you. So instead, what I like to do is call the mushies, put the mushies into soul, then Soul Blast out of mushies when you write to grade 3. The grade 2 of the right line revives it, and so you now have a full field of tokens. So that's basically why we run the Roro right line with the grade 2 from Lianorn. It's the easiest way to get a free field where you don't have to commit anything, because the deck doesn't generally plus as much as other decks might. So you kind of have to play with what you get, and then if you go first, you can do this zero commitment turn, which, well, I guess you commit one card in the early game, but like you're generally gonna want to do that because you want the pressure. So in this case, it gives you this full field, no cards from hand. You can just farm a bit and push your opponent harder on the subsequent turn. And because this always has triple drive, it's already scary enough to do some pressure. But like if you full commit, like you generally do get a lot more value. But this build that's focused on the mask doesn't have all of the tools that base Lianorn had to push, so this one does do a lot less on its first grade 3 turn and focuses more on the Persona right turn of the second grade 3 turn. Obviously, we run 4 copies of Lianorn Masques. She is the main card of the deck, but she does feel a lot different from the base Lianorn. Since base Lianorn had triple drive, it gained a lot of power. This version, because it does not have triple drive, plays more on the strength of the rear guards instead of the strength of the vanguard. And I decided to just go with tokens as the back row, so her power is a lot lower than it would have been in the normal Lianorn deck, because you gain a lot more power from different stuff. So generally, on her turn, she's a 28k attacker than if you Persona Road, because the mask allows you to Persona Ride from hand. It becomes a 38k attacker, so that's still pretty good. Like, I don't think people will complain about this, but it's just twin drive. So it's a lot less scary, and you focus a lot more on the power of the rear guards. Her removal skill is also not that important. Like, you don't really want to run more copies of base Lianorn just for the removal skill, since when you remove it, you revive a grade 1 and you retire one of your opponent's rear guards. So like it helps get rid of the intercepts, but it's not necessary. It's good. I mainly use it if I need stuff on my board instead of when I want to get rid of something on my opponent's board. Rotting a Serb Dragon. When the card was announced, people immediately flocked to the idea of running Roaming Prison Dragon in this deck. And Roaming Prison Dragon is interesting. Like, I'm not gonna say it's a bad card. It's very nice to restand something with a crit on it. But the issue was that you needed to run a lot of orders, and orders kind of don't mesh with the playstyle that Lianorn is going for. You don't always have the resources to use those orders as well. So when looking through the cards, I realized Rotting a Serb Dragon is pretty much an RPD without the crit. And the nice thing is he remains to be 13k, so like he does not lose power like RPD does. And the cool thing is, he also works on your first grade 3 turn, so when you write Lianorn, you could literally, if these two were in your drop, revive them and have 2 18k columns to swing with. So there's really some use to the card outside of just being, oh, I revived this big thing that's scary. It's just a way to fill your field and not have to commit anything, and also have something to discard during the right deck, because most of the pieces in your deck are important. So he's at 2. Do you need to run him? Maybe not, but I kind of like it when he comes up. He feels like that one card that if your opponent plays retire deck could save you. Then we'll run 2 copies of the mask. The order, we have to run it. There's no way around it. It's only 2 copies because we have access to Dept Iwelite. And Dept Iwelite is a searcher for the mask. The mask units plus D-BT10 are like the only targets I run right now, so generally if you activate the order, you're not gonna find anything, but if you're lucky, you find one of these cards. So it's the only order in the deck outside of the Blitz PG. So if you see this, you probably just want to use it, but it's also nice to just have this in hand and discard it with base Lianorn for the triple drive. So it sets it up for the next turn. Going first, that's probably the best way to go about it, because just using this to search is often a miss, and the extra drive check you get is a guaranteed card, even if it's not one of the mask units. About D-BT10, so he is my preferred turn 2 play. Like, I generally take the damage, call this down, get the Dragon Tree marker, search the mask, and like this is a 10k. You activate the mushrooms to get 2 tokens, so it's 10, 10, and 15. Doesn't sound amazing, but it's 3 attacks, and you get the setup you need for the next turn. And if this thing survives, that's fine. If you have to intercept with it, that's also fine. Like, you didn't lose any value. So this is a card that's good in the early game. You probably will never use it in the late game again. One activation is enough, but if you really want the Dragon Tree marker, if you have a use for the Dragon Tree marker, this is the way you make it. And like, searching the extra copy of the order isn't all that bad, so because it's deck filtering. One of the newest cards I really like, the cycle cards as people call them, the ones that say when you discard them during the right phase, Soul Blast 1, bot deck, draw a card. They add so much ceiling to some of these decks. Like, if you see all of these, you'll be having trouble in this deck to really resolve all of them, because you need Soul for both your grade 2 and for your Lianorn if you want to use her effect. So like, if I do the math correctly, I think you can do maximum 2, because you do it on your first turn, that gets rid of the grade 0, and then your second turn gets rid of the grade 1, yeah, and then on the third turn you would have Lianorn Soul Blasting out the grade 2, which then, oh no, yeah, the grade 2 plus Soul Blasting out herself for the draw. I guess you could actually resolve all 3 of them if you see them, since in the early game you're gonna have to put mushrooms into Soul anyway, so you'll be having 4 Soul. You can get rid of the first 3 Soul, and because she's been rode upon, she can Soul Blast herself to revive the grade 1. Yeah, so you can use all of your Soul with the Margarets, which is a nice way to plus in the early game, because this is a piece reliant deck, so you really want to see all of your pieces to make your turn 3 or your Persona right turn as explosive as possible. So that's why she's at 3, because her secondary effect to stun stuff is also not that relevant most of the time. Everybody's favorite card, the new Stoichea staple, mushrooms. It might be a Granfia card, but just making 2 plant tokens is so good. You make a 10k column with this, you make boosters with this without really any... Well, it's a +1 if you think about it, because 6k doesn't come up, 5k is the number you need, and it creates 2 5k bodies for free, just putting it into Soul, which also solves Soul issues for some cards. So this card is amazing, and as I said, with the right line, you get to have 2 uses of it, since this one revives it, and you put it into Soul early. So this card is amazing, and I think this is your main mulligan. If you see this in the early game, the games will feel a lot more smooth, and that's why I really try to hard mulligan for it. Like, even if I can't go to the mask, having seen this means my base Lianorn doesn't need any commitment and can just like farm a bit and get pieces to hand to prepare for the big turn. Going first, it's probably the most important card to see. Then I have 2 more grade 2s I want to talk about. I think most people know Tightline Dragon. His effect is on the Persona right turn, you can Soul Blast 1, choose himself and another unit, and they get +10. He becomes a 20k attacker on his own, and then because of Persona right, he's a 30k attacker. And if you have the mark, it's a 35k attacker, so that's a really nice number. But like, generally he's 30k, so restanding 30k is good, because that's more than a trigger, which we really need to do, because we need to have a lot of pressure in this deck. And this is a card most people really skim over, I think, when looking at how to build Lianorn, but this is probably my favorite card in the whole deck, because she gets so much power. So the whole idea is, if your opponent is at grade 3, so it's also pretty much Persona right turn, but you don't need to have Persona road, so she's a bit more flexible. But what happens is, when she attacks, she gets +5k for every token unit. Since this build revolves around seeing Burrow's Mushroom and reusing it with the right line, you always will have 3 tokens in the back row. meaning she gets plus 15. This means she'll be 25k on her own, plus a 10k from Persona, right? That's 35k. And if you have a Dragon Tree marker, that makes her 40k. So that's 40 times 2, which means she asks for 2 triggers per attack, which is crazy. It's so good. And nobody seems to be running this card. So I think this is the most important deck we can currently make together with Lianorn Masques, because we need good restanders to put under pressure. And I feel like she does so much. So like having 2 of these often feels better than having a tight line in her, because they both just swing for 35. Whereas if you have tight line, you go for 30 and then like 45. Like, these are amazing numbers too. But like the 30 post Vanguard swing becomes probably like your opponents will have seen defensive and it becomes a 10k shield. And like that feels a lot worse than just being able to swing again for the 35. So that's it for the grade 2s, and actually for the unit lineup. What we have left is the PGs. So we have 3 normal PGs and then an Elementaria Sanctitude. You have to run this card. It's just good against so many decks right now. So it gets around guard restricts, which are becoming a bit more common, I'd say. And then basic PGs, because it's the only way to survive. So beside that, I still have the triggers to go over. I run a lineup of 5 crit, 4 heal, 3 fronts, 3 draws, and an over trigger, which I will count as an extra heal. So that extra crit, which I will count as an extra crit. So this is a pretty unique lineup, I'd say, because I went for the split, draw, and fronts. Why did I do that? Because draw triggers are necessary. You need all your pieces. If you see this in the early game, the game will go a lot more smoothly. You will be able to guard more because you don't really need all that much CB. Like the only CB you really need is the Depto Elite and the Lianorn Masques. And beyond that, you kind of don't want CB, but if you have CB, you would use base Lianorn's effect. So being able to guard is important. So seeing defensives might help get pieces in hand. You're not that afraid of throwing away. From triggers, if you've seen a deck profile of me, you probably know I really like these cards. It's 20k shield if your opponent goes first, and that's kind of for the same reason why I like defensive draw triggers. It's so good to just being able to, like, your opponent swings for a number that's magic, 28k, you just throw it and it's like 20k shield and you're like, okay, guard. It feels so smooth to guard with these, and I don't think I could run many decks without these without feeling bad, because many decks get access to 20k swings now, and if you have a normal trigger in hand, you would need to discard also a piece, which you can't do. You need your pieces, so that's why 20k shield is so important. And offensively, seeing a front in this deck is also super nice, because both of the units in the front row have restood or will restand because of the effects at the end of battle, so they will restand and will have the power gained. So it's even a good trigger offensively in this deck, maybe even a bit better than a crit would have been. For heal triggers, I sadly don't have enough copies of the same art, so it's a split art, but yeah, it's just a basic heal. Not a fan of those gimmicky heals that get more shield value based on situations. I like consistency, and this is what gives me consistency. And then obviously 5 crit. It's all room I have left for crits, but it does the job, I suppose. You see crits often enough, but you don't really depend on them to finish the game. It's more the pressure. Just doing 5 attacks by itself can do a lot, and if you see one of these in the early game, it could obviously make the turn 3 easier, but I feel like just seeing your pieces is the way to go, and like planning ahead on how you put on the pressure instead of relying on the luck in this deck. And then obviously the over trigger. The Stoichea over trigger is probably the best one because it's literally all of these triggers combined. So that's it for the list. I think I should go over turn 3. So now I'll go quickly over our going first and going second turn. So first, for the going first turn, we draw for turn, we get the Rotting Serp Dragon, we discard it, and we write into Lianorn base. So the grade 2 effect goes off, we Soul Blast the card to revive a grade 1 from drop or less, so in this case we would revive Burrow's Mushroom, and we're lucky because we see the Rotting Serp Dragon, so it revives itself because the grade 3 was ridden. In this case we don't really have to use Mushroom's effect to put it back into Soul, but I feel like it's still good because it gives us the extra soul we need. So putting it into soul, we get another 2 tokens. We'll overcall one of the tokens so it doesn't really matter. And this setup allows us to do our base 3 attacks. So because our hand is actually really good, we will not be using the Mask of Hydragrum in this case. We'll just swing with base Lianorn on attack. Its effect will activate for a Soul Blast, and a discard we can boost with 3 rearguards, putting her at 28k triple drive, and we'll be seeing triple trigger because we're super lucky, right? And then the rearguards restand. We can swing here for 10k, and if we seen a trigger, we could have put it on here. If we didn't see a trigger and our opponent didn't see a trigger, this still hits. But if it doesn't hit, we can always swing on the rearguard. It's not that important, it's more of a setup turn. And then this one will swing for 18, which also is just stopped by a defensive. So it's a bit annoying, but at least the number is good if your opponent didn't see a defensive. So that's for the basic grade 3 turn. So now for a turn where our opponent is already at grade 3. So we still draw the Rotting Disturbed Dragon for turn. It's not that important, so we'll discard it and we ride. In this case, we will still probably call the mushrooms just to have 3 in the back row. We put it back into soul, get ourselves tokens. Then it's probably based on how much CB we have available, but like best case scenario, you could go counterblast 1, draw a card, already superior call one of these. Because it doesn't matter if you're on mask or on the base form, as long as she's on the field, she's usable. So then you activate the Mask of Hydragrum, you check the top 5 cards, you find nothing, so it goes to the grave. You put it into soul to write into Lianorn Masques. So now you get your persona right, so that's plus 10 to the front row. And then you call this from hand to have the other front row filled. So his effect activates, let's see. I guess we can Soul Blast the base Lianorn to remove her later in the game. And then they both get plus 10, just like that. Because the back row doesn't restand on this list, you always have to give power to the front row. So that's a bit unlike base Lianorn. So what would happen here is you'd swing for 30. Then on attack, she gains the power of the tokens, so that's another 15 on top. So that makes her 35, 40. That's such a nasty number. She becomes 45 just by herself. I just gotta check again, it seems like it's so much. Wait, 10, 20 from sideline, 30 from the persona right, 40, 50, she becomes 50. Casually 50k rearguard. Then we'll swing with Vanguard. Vanguard's ability allows us to triple boost, so this one doesn't have a cost. The cost only comes at the end of the battle. So this one is 38k, we do our twin drive, and at the end of the battle, if we see our opponent didn't check the over trigger, we activate a counterblast, we restand this and this. We'll go again for 30 and for 50. So yeah, that's pretty much what you do on your big turn. And it's only twin drive, which sucks because you're less likely to see good triggers, but the numbers themselves do put on a lot of pressure. So unlike with other decks, you'd really need that early rush with the tokens and with the depth Iwalid to put on pressure so your opponent has at least a smaller hand size or has taken some damage so they aren't prepared for the bigger turn. So guys, that was pretty much it for this deck profile. I hope you learned something. I think this is the best way to play Lianorn Masques currently. If we get more support cards that specifically work for Lianorn, they might actually be really good in Lianorn Masques, but they kind of have to power creep the power these two get and also work on like the first grade 3 turn, so you're not restricted to a persona right or your opponent being a grade 3. But until then, this seems to me like the best way to go about it, since they both really have so much power potential that your opponent has to guard everything you throw at them. So I hope you liked it. If this deck is for you, have fun with it. If you don't like it, check back on our channel. There might be a different deck profile that's more suited for you. Have a good one.